At the end of the Second World War, there were many executions carried out upon those who were very senior inside of the Nazi Party. A number of members of Hitler's former government were brought to trial in Nuremberg, and this included men such as Joachim von Ribbentrop, the former foreign minister, Hermann Goering, the Reichsmarshal, and Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer. But the most powerful Nazis who were sent to the gallows for their executions did not include Goering and Hess, two of Hitler's closest companions, and there were three men in particular who were the most senior figures inside of the Third Reich to be executed. Wilhelm Keitel, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, and Kurt de Luger were probably the three most powerful men during the Second World War who were executed after the conflict, and they had, during the war, had a huge number of men, officers, and soldiers at their disposal. They could order huge war crimes and reprisals, and they oversaw the deaths of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Today we look at the three most powerful Nazis to be executed during the Second World War. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. At the Nuremberg trials there was one man who was sentenced to death, who would have been the most senior and powerful Nazi to be executed, but he escaped the hangman's noose by a matter of hours. The night before he was to be sent through the gallows, Hermann Goering consumed cyanide using a capsule that he had kept upon his person for some time. Goering had allegedly kept this inside of a jar of his hair cream, and there has been a number of theories as to whether Goering had this smuggled in for an American prison officer who had become very friendly with. But Goering was the Reichsmarshal, and he was given seniority over all other officers in Germany's armed forces, making him technically the most senior soldier in the whole of the Third Reich. Goering was very powerful, and he was at one point declared the successor to Adolf Hitler, and he would actually fall from power after he allegedly tried to take control of Germany and negotiate a surrender with the Allies. Now Goering would have been the most senior Nazi to have been executed, but he was found dead hours before his execution. The most powerful Nazi to be executed, it can be argued, could be three candidates. The first of these was Wilhelm Keitel. Keitel was the chief of the Wehrmacht High Command, and with this he was the chief of the Nazi High Command of the armed forces. Keitel himself was a lackey to Hitler, and he's been described as a yes-man who did whatever the Führer wanted, and he said things to please him, rather than offer much military impact. Keitel had full knowledge of the crimes of the Holocaust, and also of the war crimes that soldiers, millions of them under his command, were committing. His signature was found on a number of illegal orders, such as the Commissar and Commando order, that led to thousands of soldiers being incorrectly executed without trial, even when they had surrendered. Keitel at the Nuremberg trials was charged with all four charges: conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, planning and waging wars of aggression, war crimes and crimes against humanity. He admitted he knew many of Hitler's orders were illegal, and he was sentenced to death. He claimed, I quote, "As these atrocities developed one from the other, step by step, and without any foreknowledge of the consequences, destiny took its tragic course, with its fateful consequences." Wilhelm Keitel wanted to be shot by a firing squad as a soldier, but this was refused, and he was executed by hanging inside of Nuremberg prison's gymnasium on a gallows by American hangman John C. Woods. It was said of Keitel's execution that Keitel entered the chamber 2 minutes after the trap had dropped beneath von Ribbentrop, whilst the latter still was at the end of his rope. But von Ribbentrop's body was concealed inside of the first scaffold. All that could be seen was a taut rope. Keitel did not appear as tense as von Ribbentrop. He held his head high, whilst his hands were being tied, and walked erect towards the gallows with a military bearing. When asked his name, he responded loudly and mounted the gallows as he might have mounted a reviewing stand to take a salute from German armies. He certainly did not appear to need the help of the guards who walked alongside, holding his arms. When he turned around atop the platform, he looked over to the crowd with the iron-jawed haughtiness of a proud Prussian officer. His last words, uttered in a full, clear voice, were translated as, "I call on Almighty God to have mercy on the German people. More than 2 million German soldiers went to their deaths for the fatherland before me. I now follow my sons, all for Germany." After his black-booted uniformed body plunged through the trap, witnesses agreed Keitel had shown more courage on the scaffold than in the courtroom, where he tried to shift his guilt upon the ghost of Hitler, claiming that all was the Führer's fault and that he merely carried out orders and had no responsibility. Another man who was executed following Nuremberg was Ernst Kaltenbrunner, who was actually the most senior SS official and the highest ranking SS officer who was brought to trial. Kaltenbrunner was the chief of the Reich Security Main Office, and he was in control of the Gestapo, SD and Kripo. He was someone who played a key role in the Holocaust and the genocide caused by the Nazis, and he oversaw security and law enforcement agencies. Many of those under his command would conduct execution and torture, rounding up suspected resistors and those who were in defiance to the Nazi regime. There was only Heinrich Himmler, more senior than Kaltenbrunner, within the SS at the end of the war, and Himmler himself had died inside of British captivity in May 1945. He was charged with crimes against peace, war crimes and crimes against humanity, and during the Nuremberg trials he actually became ill after a brain hemorrhage, but he was still brought to finish the proceedings when he recovered. He tried to state that in his position as the chief of the RSHA that he was active in intelligence and espionage and not the slaughter of people. He said that Himmler was the man who was responsible for the atrocities committed whilst he was the RSHA chief. But Kaltenbrunner was sentenced to death, and he was one of those men who, like Keitel, went through the gallows. It was said of his execution that another colonel went out of the door and over to the condemned block to fetch the next man. This was Ernst Kaltenbrunner. He entered the chamber at 1:36 a.m, wearing a sweater beneath his blue, double-breasted coat. With his lean, haggard face furrowed by old duelling scars, this terrible successor to Reinhard Heydrich had a frightening look as he glanced around the room. He wet his lips apparently in nervousness as he turned to mount the gallows, but walked steadily. He answered his name in a calm, low voice. When he turned around on the gallows platform, he first faced a US Army Roman Catholic chaplain wearing a Franciscan habit. When Kaltenbrunner was invited to make a last statement, he said, "I've loved my German people and my fatherland with a warm heart. I have done my duty by the laws of my people, and I am sorry my people were led this time by men who were not soldiers, and that crimes were committed of which I had no knowledge." This was a man, one of whose agents, a man named Rudolf Höss, confessed at a trial under Kaltenbrunner's orders he gassed 3 million human beings at Auschwitz concentration camp. As a black hood was raised over his head, Kaltenbrunner, still speaking in a low voice, used a German phrase which translated means, "Germany, good luck." His trap was sprung at 1:39 a.m. But one lesser-known Nazi who must also be considered and mentioned in the debate for the most powerful Nazis to be executed has to be Kurt de Luger. De Luger was a man who was a Nazi loyalist, and he was someone who was in control of the Orpo, the Order Police. There was during his time 120,000 active police personnel under his control, and they were loyal to De Luger. These men carried out the policing operations inside of the occupied lands and Germany, and they played a pivotal role in bringing people to concentration camps where they were then killed. De Luger was also made the deputy protector of Bohemia and Moravia, replacing the assassinated butcher of Prague, Reinhard Heydrich. He in this carried out huge reprisals for Heydrich's death, razing the villages of Lidice and Lazaki to the ground. De Luger rubbed shoulders with many high-ranking Nazis and was close friends with Heinrich Himmler, Adolf Hitler, and others such as Hans Frank. He was forced out of his job following having a heart attack during the Second World War, and he was then given a plush estate in western Pomerania by Hitler. In May 1945, De Luger was arrested by the British, and he was then charged as a war criminal and was extradited to Czechoslovakia, where he was tried for crimes against humanity. It was inside of Czech lands where he had committed many crimes, and De Luger at his trial was arrogant and unrepentant, and he actually claimed that he was beloved by 3 million policemen. He was convicted of all charges and was executed on the 24th of October 1946 using pole hanging. He was led up to the execution post, and the executioner and his assistant did their job to secure him to it, and they passed a system of ropes through pulleys at the top and bottom of the pole, and then secured the noose around his neck. They then released a drop, and De Luger's neck was snapped by the executioner inside of Prague's Pankrak prison in front of a crowd. Wilhelm Keitel, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, and Kurt De Luger were probably the 3 most senior Nazis who had the most amount of power and soldiers and men at their disposal during the Second World War, who were executed for their crimes. Many of the more senior figures such as Hitler, Goebbels, Bormann, Goering, Himmler all managed to escape the hangman's noose in different ways, but men such as Keitel, Kaltenbrunner and De Luger were the ones left to answer for the crimes of the Third Reich, but they were all themselves terrible war criminals. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.